we'll use our microphones here because, we'll use our tools, I suppose. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming and joining us today. We really appreciate the opportunity for the media and the press to help us get the word out to our constituents and residents of Missoula. The progress that we've been making in terms of storm recovery and the work that we're doing on the urban forestry project. And because this is going to be some work for a while, it'll be really helpful to have your news coverage and help folks understand what's happening. If you're having a hard time seeing me, you're more than welcome to, Griffin, I can see you like weirdly through that. You're more than welcome to move that to the ground if it's just more helpful. Nobody has to actually look through the plexiglass. And I'll also mention that the way that we're approaching this today is that we thought we would utilize the microphones up here, and folks can ask questions either when we're done directly from your seat. You're also welcome to come up and use the microphone. You don't have to necessarily treat it like public comment during city council. We'll give you more than 3 minutes. What? Never? Oh, you have to use the mic. Mary, thank you. She knows actually the rules here. That's the woman that actually knows what's happening in the room. We're going to pay attention to that. Okay. All right. Well, I'd like to go ahead and kick off by starting with a synopsis of the storm impact and the initial response. As we all know, on July 24th, we had a windstorm that devastated our community with widespread power outages, extensive property damage, and unprecedented damage to our urban forest. We're here today to talk about the next phase of our work in which we will treat trees we have identified as safety hazards. And first, we wanted to give you a little bit of background. Our immediate response focused on public safety, resident assistance, clearing trees, securing infrastructure, and supporting Northwestern Energy in power restoration. A little story, I had the opportunity this week to visit our resource recovery center, which includes our wastewater treatment plant. And, I can tell you that in the early hours of July 24th, that is exactly the work that we were doing, was making sure that things like our wastewater treatment plant were still up and running. And so when we say that we were securing infrastructure, it was vital infrastructure in terms of wastewater, in terms of water and water wells, water pumps, and then of course electricity and power, making sure that we had that as much as possible. This effort involved extensive collaboration among city departments, the Office of Emergency Management, and Missoula County. This is an opportunity to extend a huge thank you, first and foremost, to the residents of our community. The members of the public have been incredible partners in this. People stepped up and immediately helped their neighbors, immediately helped strangers in the community, and continue to do so. You're going to hear from the professionals today around the extent of the ongoing storm response and work that we're doing on our urban forest. And the citizens and residents, the residents of this community, continue to help us. And I wanted to thank the public for that and thank them not only for the work that's already been done, but the continued partnership with the public to help be responsive on the amount of tree storm damage that we are managing. And I also want to thank other teams and cities, Montana communities. We had folks from other Montana communities come, and contractors come and actually help us here in the city of Missoula in our response. And they helped us address more than 500 critical tree hazards. So we initiated an ongoing massive storm debris management effort, and we won't know the total numbers until the last material is processed, but we estimate that this storm generated about 75,000 cubic yards of debris. When I told you that I was out at the Resource Recovery Center, that includes Garden City Compost, and the massive mountain of tree debris that is out there is really incredible. And so we can talk a little bit more about that in terms of how we're handling that as a community. There's approximately 30,000 public trees that have been inspected for safety issues. So we have an upcoming urban forestry project, and this is something we're, again, very appreciative of you helping us get the message out about this. We're moving into the next phase of storm recovery, and so next month we're launching the city's largest ever urban forestry initiative to address nearly 6,000 street tree hazards caused by this July storm. It's really pretty incredible, actually, what's underway. And I think sometimes I can say personally, I'm walking down the street, I see some tree damage. But in reality, I think for most of the general public, we might think the storm is over, but it is not. And we're going to be in this for the next several months in terms of addressing this safety hazards that are out there. And we really appreciate everybody's patience and partnership in this. Public safety is our absolute top priority in this initiative. Every decision we make is guided by the need to protect residents and their property. The scope of this work is unprecedented for our urban forestry team. Crews will be working systematically from street to street throughout the city. Our work may require that you temporarily have to move your vehicle and may create some noise disturbances. We appreciate the public's patience and cooperation during this process. You're going to see large teams of large equipment moving through neighborhoods, handling this work. And normally when we would do an operation like something similar, or maybe even something not similar, we've never done anything like this, we would have the opportunity to actually connect with members of the public. We aren't going to be able to do that. And so this press conference and this news coverage helps us get the message out there, because we're going to have to just systematically move through the community in order to stay on schedule before the deep winter hits us. So please understand that these efforts are crucial for ensuring public safety and maintaining our urban forest. In some cases, we are going to have to be thinning or maybe even taking down some trees, and we understand just how sensitive we all feel about that. And so I want you to know that we have an incredible group of professionals that have assessed the damage, have assessed the health of our tree and our tree stands, and we are doing all of this work in the vein of public safety going forward. So we do have some budgetary considerations related to this work. As you're probably aware, after the storm, Missoula County was approved for the federal disaster assistance for our July 24th windstorm recovery. We're working closely with the Office of Emergency Management and FEMA to minimize storm recovery costs to our city taxpayers. Early estimates for the tree hazard mitigation project alone are about $2 million. So that's just the tree mitigation project is around $2 million. We expect that FEMA will cover the biggest portion of these costs, but for context, our annual urban forestry program budget is $829,000, and less than half of the cost of this operation alone. So it's really something, and we're very appreciative of the federal support to help our community respond. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Adrienne Beck, who directs our City County Office of Emergency Management, and she sits off to my right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Davis. As the mayor said, on the 24th, we experienced a very unique storm event that caused catastrophic damage within the city limits of Missoula, and in particularly the urban forest, generating a lot of debris. In the very early morning hours, I consulted with Mayor Davis to declare a local emergency, which is the first step in this long process of determining eligibility for federal assistance. It was very obvious in those very early morning hours that the scale and scope of this storm was going to be more than what we would normally have the capacity or the resource to deal with on our own. And so leaning into our mutual aid partners, as the mayor mentioned, as well as pulling in resources from as far away as Arkansas and Texas, as well as Oregon through the Emergency Management Assistance Compact to help us deal with this, all the while recognizing that we were still going to need additional assistance by way of resources, but primarily by way of financial recovery with the cost of dealing with all of this debris, as well as dealing with all of the emergency situations that were occurring. Very shortly after the local emergency was declared, we requested that the state also declare an emergency on our behalf. What that does is it's that second step in the process of legitimizing that the scale and scope of this is beyond our local capacity, and at the same time recognizing and documenting the costs and the damage so that we can demonstrate that it's beyond the state's capacity to provide that assistance that we would need. We then requested that the state agreed, essentially, and provided a state disaster declaration. And then very shortly thereafter, we requested a federal disaster declaration through the governor of the state of Montana. That request was granted on August 23rd, which then allows us to know for sure under the Stafford Act that FEMA public assistance, that name is a little disingenuous, right, in that it really is not intended for the public as far as individuals receiving financial assistance from FEMA, but it is designed to assist local governments in doing the work that we need to do to ensure public health and safety, as well as address the fallout as far as the debris that remained. So after August 23rd, we knew that we had that declaration. We were always operating. It doesn't change the way that we operate. It doesn't change the pace and scale with which we operate, but it allows us to then be very diligent and a little bit pedantic about how we document things. Because at the back end of this is a reimbursement program. Public assistance through FEMA is a reimbursement program. Oftentimes, I think people have an assumption that FEMA shows up and just gives you a checkbook and says, here you go, you have the checkbook to the federal treasury. That's not the way it works. We have to spend the money. We have to then document how we've spent the money to ensure that it's eligible within the public assistance grant program. They do call it a grant program because it is reimbursement. And then we also have to follow the Stafford Act, which means that because we are going to be using and eventually being reimbursed with federal dollars, we have to follow federal guidelines in some ways. And so some of the work that we're doing maybe looks a little bit different. For example, we had to hire a firm to monitor all of the contractors that are working to help us deal with this debris to ensure that we have that level of compliance necessary for FEMA eligibility. At the end of the day, we work with FEMA as well as Montana State Disaster and Emergency Services to catalog and categorize all of those costs that then will be submitted to FEMA in different packets based on different categories of work. So, for example, we talked about emergency work. That work that was done in those first 48, 72 hours was really just around keeping the lights on and making sure that the water pumps were working and making sure that the traffic lights had appropriate generators, having firefighters in on overtime, having law enforcement in on overtime to do traffic control. That all is what they categorize as emergency work. And so, organizing all of the things that were happening into these different categories then allows us to say, this is what we were doing during this period of time. We believe it's eligible. These were our costs. And then at some point in the future, they will reimburse us. The reimbursement is at 75%. And so we locally still are on the hook for that 25% of that total cost. But there are ways in which we can soften that a little bit by using matching funds. So all of the volunteer efforts that we were able to capture count towards that 25% match, as well as eligible staff time that is doing the work on their normal work day anyway. We can use that as match. And so at the end of the day, we won't know what those total costs are. We have some estimates, as the mayor alluded to, but this is a long process. This is what we call the recovery process. Sometimes people think of recovery as making us whole. It's not necessarily making us whole, but it's trying to get back to a sense of normalcy. It's trying to get all of our public health and safety concerns alleviated, so that then we can begin to look to the future and how we're gonna deal with the loss of trees and some of those types of things. Our office also will be closely working with FEMA and the state of Montana to look at what they call hazard mitigation grant programs. Whenever there is a federal disaster that's declared, it releases a percentage of that total disaster's cost back to the state, and the priorities given to the community that had the disaster to access grant funds that address natural hazards. And so in this case, we'll be looking for ways to creatively use that hazard mitigation grant funding to recover even further from this storm, but more importantly, to do projects that make us more resilient to these types of massive weather events.
Thanks, Adrian. So my name is Morgan Valiant. I oversee the Ecosystem Services Division within Missoula Parks and Rec, and so that includes our urban forestry program, which you'll hear a lot from today, and our conservation lands management program. I don't have too much to add. I mean, I think we are all still a little shocked at how much damage was created by a 45-minute wind event. I mean, we've got months and months of work. I can say that we are incredibly thankful that, I mean, it's a little bit of a blessing and a curse that we were able to qualify for federal assistance, but we would not be able to get out of this if it weren't for that option. As Mayor Davis alluded to, you know, this is a large recovery cost, even just with the tree damage that we're seeing and are going to have to address. You know, of that money that we do have allocated to our urban forest, the majority of it is in staff salary time. And so that is our urban forester, Ben, and our urban tree specialist, Marie, and then 4 arborists. And that is the majority of it. Our contracted services budget is about $130,000 a year. And the scope and scale of what we've been able to inventory over these past few weeks really represents about 10 years worth of tree work if we were to just do it on our own with our own city resources. And so we are very much looking forward to being able to bring in contracting resources and get these hazards mitigated as quickly as possible. And then so we can go on and continue to do the other good work that we need to do within the community. So I'm not going to take too much time, but I did want to share some of this data on the inventory and where we're at. This is the first time we've been able to actually present this data publicly. Very early on in the response, we had folks going out into neighborhoods to look for hazards. And debris and hazards are the first thing we were looking for, like trees that were actively failing or on someone's car or blocking a roadway. And then that effort really transitioned to and was largely volunteer driven. And so another shout out to all the great citizens that we have here in Missoula that stepped up to walk block by block throughout the entire city limits to look for hangers, where hangers are just dead hanging limbs that are waiting to fall in the next windstorm that could cause further damage, or trees that were so impacted or so damaged that they needed to be removed. We have now, through a ton of different resources, I mean, I think I haven't even counted it, but I bet we probably had 20 to 30 people over the past 6 weeks going street by street, block by block, through every street and block of the city. And we've accomplished that in 6 weeks, which is just a monumental task. When you look at the map, if we want to throw it back up there again, the dots you see here, the purple squares are hanging limbs in trees. The triangles, green triangles, are trees that need to be removed. We are contracting this work out based on geographic zones, and so we've split the city up into kind of slant streets, University District, 6th Street north to the river, Franklin to the Fort, everything north of the river, and all of South Missoula. We definitely saw, and I think this is pretty apparent in every natural disaster, nature doesn't discriminate. It hit all neighborhoods. We've got tree damage across all neighborhoods. Some areas were hit a little harder than others. In general, as of today, right now, I think we've got 5,811 trees that either have broken hanging limbs or need to be removed. We're sitting at just under 600 trees that need to be removed. So a colossal amount of pending risk and liability that needs to be addressed in a very short order. We did just put out bid packages this week to start to bring contractors in, and we bid them based on these geographic zones to have contractors come in and do the work. We know that we are going to be drawing contractors from other communities. We tried to also create work zones that would be approachable for our own local contractors that might have the capacity to do this, because we think it's obviously really important to support our local businesses as we get out of this storm response. This is the map that we've really been using internally to develop these geographic zones to do the work. The 6th geographic zone there that you see, the 91 trees that is in pink, and the 415 aerial hazards is just within our parklands. And so those are just our public spaces versus our right-of-ways. And we are distinguishing those for a couple reasons. First off, we kind of just need a higher level of oversight when we're moving into parks to do work. Most of the work is not accessed from the street, from a hardened landscape. You're driving through areas where we have other resources that we need to take care of. But also those trees within our public parks are covered by our city's insurance, MMIA insurance. And so we do have that resource that's also coming in. And one of the great things about our insured trees in our public spaces is the cost of that insurance also covers treatment of the stump and replanting of the tree, which is huge. And so our public spaces, we're going to be able to get back and replace those trees a lot quicker. We are working, as Adrian mentioned, on other forms of funding to replace trees within our urban right-of-ways. And I'd be negligent if I didn't say, and I just want to throw it out there, that we should not see trees as risks or liabilities. Trees are the number one thing that is going to keep our community resilient if, as temperatures climb, or as we have hot summers, or as we try to reduce energy costs on adjacent buildings and homes, or absorb stormwater runoff. They are incredibly important green infrastructure and are a big ticket on how we're going to make our community more resilient in the future. And so they've got a lot of value, and we're treating them as such. And the first thing that we really need to do over the next 90 days is to deal with all the hazards that are out there. So I'm gonna turn it over to Ben, and he's gonna walk you a little bit through differences between hangars, difference between removals, and show you a public-facing map that we are going to have going live today that will allow any member of the public to go search their address, click on a dot, see pictures of the tree in front of their house, understand what work is coming forward. It is also going to be a map that is going to be updated in real time as contractors move through neighborhoods. So you'll be able to track this work progress by the minute if you really want to. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Ben.
Thanks, Morgan. So you guys have done a pretty comprehensive job of explaining the situation to this point, and thanks for that. To drill into the details a little bit, and some of this may be very obvious for a lot of people, but a hangar or an aerial hazard is something that FEMA does not define by size. They allow the community to define that. So we set a 1-inch minimum threshold for any severed or broken limb that may still be suspended in the canopy of a tree. We tried to consider what would still do damage to persons or property should they fail in the future. And so those are the size categories, or the size category. 1-inch minimum at the point of break and larger that we will be treating. And treatment in this case just means removal of the hanging branch and severance of the stub that's created from removing that branch. The reason that we are only able to do this is because of the regulations surrounding the FEMA reimbursement that we're going to be seeking for this. Unfortunately, FEMA is here to help us protect the community and restore safety to the greatest of our capacity. We liken it to, let's say you have an automobile that you've been driving around and it's got some damage, and then you get in a fender bender, and your insurance is there to cover the replacement of that fender, but they're not going to go through and repaint your entire car and get rid of all the dings and dents and everything else. So there is going to be maintenance that is not addressed through these contracts. There's going to be continued issues with some of the trees, but we're going to do what we can with the funds that are there and try and do the best that we can to restore public safety. On a more impactful note for individual residents, there are 570 some odd trees queued for removal in this. Each one of those trees has been looked at by an International Society of Arboriculture qualified tree risk assessor. That's a level above a certified arborist, requires a little bit higher credentials and having gone through coursework and done a field practical to identify trees that pose an unacceptable level of risk to persons or property. So we've already treated over 200 trees, and by treated in this case I mean removed. The majority of those were trees that had failed onto personal property of some kind, and so we are trying to open roadways, clear people's cars, remove trees from houses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But now we have another additional 571 that, for a variety of reasons, which can range from, complete root plate failure, like an uprooting of a tree toppling over, to something that's far less obvious, like structural integrity loss because of a vertical stem crack. Some of those things might not be obvious to the layperson, but we have had qualified individuals look at each of these trees and survey whether or not we can reasonably and responsibly retain them, because we would like to do that in every capacity and as much as we can. Unfortunately, we have to weigh that against the potential risk to persons or property, and these trees absolutely must go and fall under the regulations that FEMA set out for us on that. So, all that being said, I think that kind of helps people understand the whys of why we're doing the work that we're doing. We have partnered with Debris Tech, who is a firm out of the South, and they'll be hosting the website that is public facing that will allow residents to check to see if they have a tree that is on the list to have an aerial hazard removed from it, or potentially have the entire tree removed. Now, as I had said, this firm is out of the southeast, so I've been having issues with connectivity, and we can try and give a little bit of a demonstration if you want to pop that up on the screen. I was doing this from the office earlier to try and, potentially show you guys some examples of how this is going to work, and it was operating very glitchy. But you can see, you can zoom out as far as we can. But if we zoom in on a street, let's just go to Eddy Street. Eddy Avenue. And so all the yellow dots are identified aerial hazards, those broken hanging branches that are creating an unacceptable level of risk to the public way. And the red dots are trees that have been identified for removal. For the most part, these trees are going to be obvious to the layperson, but sometimes they won't. So 253 Eddy has been identified as a removal. We scroll down, it has a bunch of the categories: severe damage, will the tree need to be removed? Yes. And that's a Norway maple with very extensive canopy damage. When you see loss of canopy over 50% like that, there's some obvious decay. We cannot retain that tree because it's posing an unacceptable level of risk to the adjacent property. That tree is slated for removal. And this is something that has occurred all over town. If we take a quick look at some of the newer areas of town, where I just can't get this scroll thing right, man. Like, I should have brought my mouse. If we go to another area of town and just take a look, like over on Fleet here, 24, 25 Fleet, and the connectivity seems to improve, which is great. It's another removal. And these are smaller trees because this is in Pleasant View, Hellgate Meadows area, and it's a newer neighborhood. So this is an example of something that may not be obvious to a resident. Large longitudinal crack in a major scaffold branch of the tree. The contrast or the brightness is not that great on there, but there's a linear crack that is split, and you can see daylight through on a major scaffold branch. This is non-evident structural damage that would pose an unacceptable level of risk to the street, as you can see that it's extending out over the road. So, as Morgan had stated, this will be going public. We would again ask that the public remain patient. As you guys have said, we've had something like 30 to 40 volunteers, hired professionals, and a variety of skill levels looking at these trees, individuals who have no experience with this type of software. So we are currently going through systematically and looking. We do have some duplicate points. We do have some conflicting information, but we're really making a significant amount of progress. And for the most part, the data is solid and we are able to go out to bid. We just sent bids out for our aerial hazard removal yesterday. That's a 2-week bid process. We're hoping to have contractors mobilized around the first week of next month. So that's really when you'll start to see things picking up. But when this goes public, it'll give people an opportunity to kind of chime in, take a look at your property, and let us know if we may have missed something or we need to correct something. I don't know if there's anything else for me to cover. Morgan, you can go ahead and chime in.
Yeah, I think the other thing, and as we've gone back, and it was it took a lot of time and a lot of effort to collect all this data. We've gone back, especially on the removals, and this is largely a lot of the work Marie's been doing, is going back and reaffirming those removals. We have seen a lot, and I want to throw out another thank you to the folks that have just decided to contract with a private tree company and deal with that hazard in front of their house. And so another thing to look for as the public gets on this site, if you see a point on your property and you address that, please let us know. That'll help tremendously. Every dot we can take off the map just gets us out of this thing a little quicker.
Oh, thank you. One thing I'd like to throw out there is that the yellow tags, even though they do say trim on them, please note, like we said earlier, we will only be pulling just what's broken from the storm. So there's been a little bit of misinformation because of the wording on the tag itself. And then also you can see when you see an orange or red tag out there and it actually has a city logo on it, that will be different than the original orange and red tags that were put out in the field by the contractor. So if you see any of those, they have either been pulled from our inventory or maybe just let us know if you have one of those and they haven't been switched over to the city tags.
Mary, if you want to pop up the map again. So this is just an example of what Marie was just illustrating. This tree may or may not have a tag on it that says trim. That is, again, a bit of a misnomer. What we can see here is an individual branch that's failed, probably hanging over somebody's boulevard. It's a prospective risk to person's property, anyone who may be using the sidewalk. The only portion of that tree that will be treated per FEMA regulation is that broken branch. It'll be somewhat subjective. The contract is written such that the arborist who is on site should be correcting that split to the next lateral branch. So there will be variability in the amount of material that's taken out of each tree, but we have to trust in the arborists, and they all are certified, that are coming in to do the work, that they're making the right judgment call on site, because we do not have the capacity to stand there and tell them where to make every cut.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, and then we'll turn it over to questions. You've heard us say a lot about what FEMA is requiring us to do. We would not be able to actually prune all of these trees anyway, and so we are very much aligned with these FEMA requirements to remove these aerial hazards. That is exactly what we need to do. That is how we are going to get through this in a short period of time. Fully pruning 5,000 trees is going to take a lot more than 90 days, and we're trying to do all this work in 90 days to just mitigate this risk and get us out of this storm event. So with that, I definitely entertain any questions.
I'm on? Okay, Griffin Smith with the Missoulian. Just to visualize this for folks, are we going to lose entire blocks? Are we going to have a lot of places that are spread out? What is it going to look like for some areas of town?
It's pretty spread out, honestly. It really mattered where the wind didn't have any mass dampening effect. So some of the areas that were hit the hardest are those that didn't have a lot of canopy coverage, intersections. Those were hit the hardest, but it's not going to be like every tree on an entire block.
Downtown wasn't hit that hard because there's buildings.
Yeah.
And to elaborate on what Marie said a little bit, age, size, concentration of tree canopy, that obviously affects where the damage is the most noticeable. If you're just looking at the map, and I don't know if you could pop that up again, there's a concentration of tree removals in the Slant Street neighborhood, and that had to do with the direction of the wind, the intensity of the wind as it moved through town, but also the trees in both the university and the Slant Street areas are some of our more mature trees that would have been in full leaf, a very large sale. And so they're going to be impacted significantly more than, if you look just to the south of there. We're in a commercial area down by the mall or down south of Mound on Brook Street. There's just not as many public trees through there. So the impacts to different areas of town are based completely on the distribution and size and age class of the trees.
Yeah, obviously this is focused on the removal of trees, treating of trees. Is there talk already about, replacing these trees and planting new trees in those areas?
If I can get my mic to work. Yes, we have started talking about that, and what it's going to come down to is grant-funded opportunities, and also once we get this portion of the recovery completed, we'll know what our next steps are, where we can replant, what sites are available, because not every tree can be replaced just because of location, utilities, site obstructions for intersections. So that is definitely our next step, but we aren't there yet.
One last question for me. The project that we're working on, or the next 90 days, you said $2 million. Is there a price tag on the entire storm damage so far?
The short answer is no, I can't give you a specific number. I could ballpark it for you though, right? So just managing the debris alone, which we haven't even gotten through yet, right? We're going to generate a whole lot more over the next 90 days as well. That in and of itself will probably be just shy of $1 million. And that does not account for the staff time with our city streets that did a tremendous amount of that work of bringing that debris to those sites. And so in total, when we look at this contract that's about to go live and estimating that at about $2 million with the work that has already occurred and still needs to occur, it's equal. So it's about another $2 to $2.5 million.
So back of the envelope, over $4 million.
That's probably a good guess, yes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Don't hesitate to come on up.
Oh, that's like $1 million for every 10 minutes of wind.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's an interesting way to say it. Morgan just said that's about $1 million for every 10 minutes of wind that came through the valley.
My question for y'all is, was there a specific species of tree that had more damage than others?
Typically, we do see failures by species profile, so the classic one being blue spruce. And we did see many of those fail, but it really was everything except the trees that were already standing dead because they had no canopy. So the trees with the biggest canopy got hit the hardest. So, we saw from Norway maple, sugar maple, blue spruce, we had one white fir. We had one in the entire urban forest. And it went. So, I mean, there was no way to predict, what species would fail in this one.
Gotcha.
And I can elaborate a bit on that. I mean, as I alluded to before, stocking density and percent canopy coverage per species would obviously dictate that. So, I mean, from a number standpoint, we probably saw more failures on Norway maple just because we have over a 20% stocking density of Norway maple throughout the public trees in the urban forest. So it's just a matter of quantity. But as Marie had stated, 80 plus mile an hour winds don't discriminate,
Unless it's standing dead.
Yeah.
So for the replanting, are there plans to plant different species that might be more resilient to the wind?
Well, the short answer to that is yes and no, because all species, when we have winds like this, are vulnerable. So there are some, depending on their form, that are more upright, more faceted, that will be less susceptible. But again, a lot of it comes down to proper planting practices and ensuring that we have correct soil volumes for those trees to really anchor their root systems into and to build proper root systems. A lot of the failures that we did see, I have some pretty great pictures, really showed improper planting practices was a direct result of a whole tree failure.
Gotcha. And then my last question is, Mason mentioned this, that the urban forest is still kind of part of the resiliency plan with the changing climate. What else can be done? Unfortunately, this may not be the last major windstorm we see. What kind of preparations are being taken in the, potential anticipation of that?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, just to tee off what Marie was saying as well, I mean, is some of the silver lining, and I'm an eternal optimist. I mean, we do have now an opportunity to replant a significant portion of our urban forest. And I mean, the city as a whole has been meeting a ton, and our climate team has been working on climate resiliency within our urban areas. And so, you know, this loss is going to allow us to push forward a lot of those things that we've been discussing about how to buffer our community from future events. Some of the things that I think, and you know, Marie kind of alluded to it, that are really important too is, you know, you look at some of our areas of town that were hit the hardest, like Slant Streets and University District. Those trees are all the same species, and they're all planted at the same time, and they're all the same age. Just having age class differences and species differences in a more diverse urban forest helps us buffer a lot more of these types of things. And so some of the things that really hampered us, and we do have, you know, Marie does a lot of our development review and working with our developers, making sure that we're not repeating some of the mistakes that we made 100 years ago where we planted one type of tree as a monoculture across the entire neighborhood. You know, that is incredibly important for buffering any kind of a natural disaster, whether it's a windstorm or disease or whatever.
Thank you.
That's not to discredit the efforts of the people 100 years ago who are responsible for the beautiful canopy we have in Missoula today.
They were great. Thank you. Any of those that are listening.
Hi, Austin Amistoy, Montana Public Radio. You guys covered so much, and I was taking as diligent of notes as I could, so this may have been addressed, but I wanted to ask anyway. The public-facing website, has it gone live yet, or is that something only you guys have access to at the moment?
Not yet. Up until about 4 o'clock yesterday, I was still going back and forth with the software developer from the contract organization. So I'm thinking soon. I don't know. We could probably have it up, you know, this week or next. We do have a couple of minor tweaks to make, but it should be publicly available prior to any work starting.
Yeah, for what it's worth, just as background, and Ben kind of mentioned it, our software developer, Debris Tech, that has been just amazing to work with, are based out of Louisiana, and so the last few days have been pretty rough for them, and so they had full power loss, and so we kind of lost communications for 3 or 4 days, and so yeah, we can blame Milton for that one. That natural disaster derailing our ability to communicate our natural disaster, but you know, that's okay. We'll give them a pass.
Debris Tech is out of Mississippi.
Mississippi. So.
There you go.
If I might say, if there's any team that understands that we need to be flexible with storm recovery, it's this team and folks that we also, and not to derail us from the specific conversation, but we had talked about mutual aid earlier. And also as a bit of context, we have members from our community serving Southeast United States right now. You know, our assistant chief of fire chief is in Georgia right now. Your whole office has deployed down to that area. That's much of how this works, and it's something that also I think you know, both gives me optimism and a lot of faith in the way that our emergency response works in this country. It's oftentimes behind the scenes, but yeah, members of our community are down there helping right now. I wanted to, you know, to add on the tree question. One of the things we do recognize just how much trees not only offer a quality of life for our residents, it really is a key focal point for our strategic plan in the sense that we are focusing on ways to reduce the urban heat effect, and obviously we realize that this has impact, and so we'll continue to stay in close contact with members of the public around how we may be continuing to further that goal. I will say that I was really happy that City Council passed one of the requests that Parks had, which was to add to our urban forestry team. And you know, there's a lot of requests we could not make happen, and it's certainly a priority of mine to make sure that we're paying attention to Missoula's urban forest, recognizing the many benefits that we get, and the timing of that was really good. So I would say that. Sorry to distract from your questions, Austin.
No, thank you. That's really helpful. And as a quick follow-up to that, when the website goes live, where should I tell people how to find it?
I would.
So that's, missoulaparks.org/storm is where we're going to be putting all the links to all this information and a ton of great FAQs. And so definitely a first stop for anyone that has any questions about trees.
And then one more thing, beyond the map and folks looking at it themselves, will people in neighborhoods be alerted before work gets to them at all, or will they have to be proactive in seeking that out?
No, it's going to operate similar to leaf pickup or street sweeping. There's a clause in the contract that whichever contractor is selected for each individual geographic area provide 24 hours notice, and that'll be physical signage. We haven't determined whether or not we're going to include anything on the website, but yeah, it will be integral to the effort in getting things done in the time frame that we're shooting for people to be aware that when those signs go up, they need to move their cars, and we appreciate, their effort in doing that so that the work can get done in a timely fashion.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add on to that a little bit in that our map will show what zones have been completed so you can see where the contractors are and where they're going.
Hi, Taylor Richardson, Nonstop Local. I just had a question about the reiteration of what people see in terms of the different trees that are tagged around the city that are the yellow tags. Are those all specific trees that are going to be all removed completely, or are they just going to be trimmed? Could I just get further clarification on that? And if you could hold your response till I get back to my camera, that'd be awesome.
You got it. Yes, so trees that are tagged with a yellow tag, those trees will be specifically identified in a contract for quote unquote hanger and broken branch removal only. And then the tags that have the City of Missoula logo, a QR code, and they're color coded and orange red, those trees are ones that will be removed to a 3-foot stump. Not anymore? Okay, ground level, sorry. Updated information.
And to further elaborate on that, being that we've had such a diverse group of people conducting the inventory of these trees, not every tree that has an aerial hazard or a hanger in it has been identified with a yellow tag. Every tree that was identified internally, not through the debris tech firm, has no demarcation on it aside from it being digitally recorded in this map. So, there is a difference in the icons in the map currently. And you can tell what debris tech has inventoried versus what we have done internally. That will likely go away because it's really of no consequence. But we did a significant amount of work on our own, but we don't have a tagging system because we generally don't affix things to public trees.
Katie Fairbanks, Montana Free Press. I was wondering, I know there's been some wind, some rain and storms, I guess not that many recently, but, has there been additional damage, additional hangers, will those be able to be addressed? Or since you kind of have to differentiate for funding, is there any damage you've seen that won't be addressed?
We have had 3 pretty significant wind events since the July 24th event. The July 24th event is the only one that's been declared disaster, and so we have been delineating the damage. That doesn't mean that we have any less responsibility to keep roadways open and keep our public rights of way clear and safe. It's just that reimbursement funding is only available for damages associated with the July 24th storm. So luckily we got a little break in between them, and the broken branches, trees down and such, they obviously are no longer transpiring water, and they get wilty pretty quickly when it's 90+ degrees outside. And so it made it pretty easy for us to differentiate what debris was from that storm and what came later.
Yeah, and I want to point out, this is another great thing about having assistance, is that we can get our contractors focused on the 24 event, and that frees up our own staff to deal with the tree work that we have to deal with every day. And so, yeah, it's not that stuff won't be addressed.
Parker Christiansen, NBC. I know you guys have been using drones as of late. Was that knowledge, I guess, used to survey this damage?
If you're referring to the pilot program that you and I talked about previously, that was more of a pilot to help us determine areas that were lacking in our overall tree inventory. We were trying to flesh out the missing gaps in data in where our public trees are located, because the 30,000-ish trees that we have in our current tree inventory that we use to maintain the urban forest on a regular basis, it's separate from the inventory we've been referencing today, is estimated at like 60 to 75% complete. So that drone pilot program was used in an effort to figure out how we're going to complete the inventory so we know exactly what we're attempting to manage. That being said, I do believe that they use drones, and Adrian may be able to elaborate on this a little bit to help estimate debris quantities.
Yeah, so drones are a fantastic technology. We use them in emergency response all the time to just get us better situational awareness. But in this case, one of the challenges that we had was trying to estimate the size of the debris piles that we had at many debris sites. And estimating that size was important as we were trying to solicit contractors for the processing of that debris, as far as just giving them an idea of how much debris we had. So we did use some drones to help with some measurement and estimation of volume of sizes.
Any other questions? Got it covered. We really appreciate everybody being here today. Thank you again. Also, we will put out, no doubt, public information when the link goes live. So the City of Missoula and Parks, we have Facebook pages. We'll make sure we get that information out so you can help us spread the word and folks can access this website, which is really an incredible piece of technology. And to see the behind the scenes as this information has been getting populated has really been something. So we really encourage members of the public to utilize this website when it goes live. It really is, I think, very, very helpful to understand what's happening. And I just want to acknowledge this team of people up here and the folks that they all work with that are not able to be part of this today. Thank you so much for what you have done to help Missoula respond and recover to the situation. We have a community of people that have really come together, and certainly the professionals up here really have exemplified some of just the most wonderful parts of our community. So thank you again for everybody for being here, and thank you for everything you've done. Thanks, Pat.